Are we rolling? Yes, we are. What's up, guys? It's your McKinley Crain here, and today I'm going to be doing my spoiler-free review of WandaVision Season 1, Episode 9, which is the final episode of the season, and, as I've heard, it's also the final episode of the series, because this is apparently a mini-series, so we're not going to be getting a Season 2. Well, we're probably not going to be getting a Season 2. Anyway, this episode once again stars Elizabeth Olsen as Scarlet Witch, aka Wanda Maximoff, and Paul Bettany as Vision. And let me just say that this episode, like the last episode, doesn't really have a sitcom side plot or like main plot to it. Like, this episode isn't like part sitcom at all. Like, and neither is episode 8. I'm having to say that because if you've been watching the series or have watched all the episodes of the series like I have, you know that for the majority of the episodes there is a sitcom. There's always like a sitcom story, whether it's like a sitcom part plot, whether or not it's like the entire plot of the episode, like the entire story of the episode, or just plot A of the episode or plot B of the episode, the side story or the main story of the episode. Most of the episodes always have some sort of sitcom story part of them. And what I mean by that is most of the episodes always have some part of the story that takes place in not only the setting in which the sitcom illusion thing, I don't know what to call, I don't know exactly know the word to call it, is happening, but it's not just in the setting, it's actually occurring. So what I'm saying is that most of the episodes have sitcom parts of them where the way the characters communicate are supposed to be in the style of a sitcom. There's the dialogue is very similar to a sitcom. A lot of the story takes place, the episode stories take place in a sitcom. You know what I'm saying? But this episode and the previous episode, there's none of that, because they don't have time to focus on any of that. They really don't have time. They really didn't, because the 2 episodes have already come out that I'm talking about have already come out, the last 2 episodes of the season in the series. They really didn't have time to have that whole sitcom setting thing in the story. So this episode and the previous episode technically take place in the setting, the place where the sitcom illusion thing happens, but there is no sitcom illusion thing that's happening in that place, which is Westview, in those 2 episodes. It's just all normal MCU dialogue mostly. There are a few flashbacks of the sitcom setting parts of the show, but those are just flashbacks. So yeah, this episode is not technically a sitcom episode an episode of a sitcom. I don't know whether or not I can consider this show a sitcom anymore. I never fully, you know, counted this show as like a sitcom, because I knew that, the whole sitcom thing was just kind of an illusion, if that makes sense. Like just a setting, kind of like a disguise for what was really going on. Like, underneath, like, all that sitcom stuff in the show. And I was right. Anyway, I was right. That wasn't even a spoiler. Any Marvel fan knew that. Any MCU fan watching this show knew that, knew that the whole sitcom setting thing couldn't stay there forever, if you know what I mean, because, it was very different from, it was very, different from the normal tone of the MCU and the normal setting of the MCU. And the sitcom setting was awesome. It was perfect. And the settings for this episode and the previous episode were perfect too. This is a perfect episode. All of the episodes of WandaVision are perfect. It's a perfect series. Anyway, so this is the final episode of the series, right? So, a lot happens in this episode. There is a villain in this episode. I can't say who, because that would be a spoiler. But there is like a final showdown. There is there's a lot of action in this episode, if that makes sense. This episode is an action, the genre of this episode is action. Like, there's a lot of action in this episode. I can't classify this whole series, aka this whole season of WandaVision, as action, because if you've seen the previous episodes, you know that they're not completely action. And for the first two episodes, there was no action at all. It was just completely the whole sitcom setting thing. But there was nothing wrong with that. That worked perfectly. But as the series went along, there started to be a little bit of action, and more action. And this episode has the most action of the series. It has more action than any other episode. And you might be thinking, well, duh, it's the final episode of a Marvel show. And what are most Marvel movies and shows? What genre are most Marvel movies and shows under? Action, of course. So yeah, there's a lot of action in this episode. We learn a lot. We learn a lot of new information. A lot happens that I can't really say what happened. That I can't really talk about, too much, because spoilers. But there's some really big stuff that happens in this episode, and I love this episode. This episode was the best episode. Is the best. Well, I guess I could say is the best episode of the entire season and the entire series of WandaVision. And I can't say so far because, like I said, this is a television miniseries, so it only lasts one season. And that season is over now. This is obviously not the last, Wanda and Vision kind of project or movie or TV show. This isn't a movie, but you know what I'm saying. We might get a movie a WandaVision movie in the future that will, like, star them, or like we'll have them as like co-stars or side characters. They're gonna be in like upcoming MCU movies and MCU shows. That's obvious, but this show was just a television miniseries, so we're not gonna get a season 2. That's what I'm saying. Anyway, this episode is awesome. The action is perfect. The characters are perfect. The ending was a bittersweet ending, and I kind of expected the series to have a bittersweet ending, kind of like Captain America: Civil War had a bittersweet ending. Cause this show was already like dark, if you know what I mean. So I expected there to be like a bittersweet ending. Plus, it just kind of all made sense that there would be a bittersweet ending, because I can't really get into detail, but if when a character like has to make a decision in this like series, like a big decision, like you know that they can't have one thing without the other, and if they give up one thing, they're gonna have to give up another big thing. So I knew it was gonna be bittersweet. But it was a perfect ending, and the acting is perfect. The editing is perfect. The pacing is perfect. The dialogue is perfect and witty, and really goes along well with like what's going on, and it's just great. And this episode has like a lot of emotional moments in it, and some of them are like sad moments. This episode isn't like nearly as sad as the previous episode, but it's not really intended to be. This episode like has a lot of plot, has like a lot of like side plots, if you know what I mean, but it doesn't like it handles them very well. Like, it executes these plots in a way where like they don't like mess each other up. Like, they work. And there are some other characters in this episode besides Wanda and Vision. A big character in this episode is Agatha. Agatha is a big character in this episode. Can't say why, because that would be a spoiler. Sergeant Monica Rambeau is kind of like a big character in this episode. And Evan Peters is in this episode too, as Pietro, aka Quicksilver. And he's great as always. We get like some questions about him answered in this episode, but we don't get every single detail answered about the mystery of why he's there, like, answered in this episode. And I think that's because they're leaving that question to be like all those questions to be answered in like future projects, future MCU projects. A lot of people like kind of misinterpreted some stuff about him in the episode and thought that this episode answered all of the questions, and just jumped to one conclusion about like all the stuff that's going on with him. But I think that they're wrong, because if you really think about it, this episode didn't specifically say one thing or another, like about a specific question about his appearance. It answered some, but it didn't answer all of the questions. And I can't wait to see those questions answered in future MCU projects. And this episode was just perfect. All the characters have great chemistry with each other, especially Wanda and Vision. But the whole cast has perfect character chemistry with each other. And I just love this episode, and I love this series. This episode has 2 post-credit scenes. Well, one is technically a mid-credit scene. It has 1 mid-credit scene and 1 post-credit scene. And they're both perfect. They're both great and leave you wanting more, and kind of tease for future, kind of tease for what the future of certain MCU projects could be like, if you know what I mean. I like the post-credit scene a little bit better than the mid-credit scene, but they're both perfect and they're both great. Anyway, I'm gonna give this episode a 100% out of 100%, which is the equivalent of an A+. Like, subscribe, join the notification squad. I will return.